Hi, this is Anne, and I'm going to read the second story from my book Tui Street Tales. And this story is called Recycling Ella, and you can see the picture that goes at the beginning of this story. Every Monday evening, Ella was responsible for wheeling the family rubbish bins out to the curb in Tui Street. Even when it was getting dark, she could be seen sorting through the rubbish, carefully separating the paper, plastic, tin and glass from the ordinary rubbish and placing them in the recycling bin. Ella lived on the other side of the road from Tim and Jack. Although she took part in school activities with the other Tui Street kids, Ella didn't often join in when they played soccer and skateboarded outside their homes. She'd wave at them, but her serious face seemed to say that she had other things to do, so the children waved back and left her alone. Sometimes, if Tim heard Ella wheeling the bins down her driveway, he'd join her, as he hated the thought of Ella working away by herself in the dark. One evening, Ella's rubbish bin had a particularly nasty smell. Tim had to hold his nose. "Oh, what's in there? It smells like a dead rat." "It is a dead rat," Ella said, scrunching up her nose. "The cat caught 2 water rats from the creek and brought them inside. Dad wrapped them in newspaper and stuffed them in this bin." "Ugh, they're rotting." "Yeah, sorry, Tim. You don't have to help me." "Yuck," Tim muttered to himself as he walked a few steps away to pick up a long stick from under a tree. Why didn't he wrap them up more, or just bury them? Ella didn't answer. She'd become absorbed in fishing a large plastic bottle out of the bin. "Here, use this," Tim said, holding out the long stick, "or you might accidentally touch one." Ella worked quickly and quietly, passing pieces of recyclable rubbish to Tim, who stomped angrily on them before hurling them into the recycling bin. He couldn't understand Ella's father. After Ella's mother had died, he just left her alone a lot. Now, even with her stepmother and 2 small stepsisters there, she still often seemed to be alone. After helping Ella with the rubbish, Tim went home to shower and get ready for bed. His dad looked up from his laptop when Tim came out in his pyjamas. "All cleaned up, Tim?" "Yep, definitely needed a shower after that. Their bin was gross." "Well, no bin's exactly hygienic, Tim." "Yeah, I know, but Dad, does Ella's father like her?" Tim's dad's eyebrows dipped downwards, as they often did when he was presented with something unexpected. "Well, I'm sure he does. Why do you ask?" "I think he's mean to her." Tim's father scratched his head. He was very lonely after Ella's mum died. I'm sure he cares for Ella well enough, but I guess he found it hard being on his own with a child. Tim shook his head. "But we're okay on our own." "Yeah, well, after your mum died, Tim, we had so much help from your aunties and uncles, and Jack's mum and dad next door. They still help me when I need someone to mind you. I don't think Ella's dad has had much help." Jack said his mum tried to help Dad, but Ella's dad was rude. Tim's father raised an eyebrow. "It's true. He told her to leave them alone." "Some people just like to keep to themselves, Tim. He's entitled to do that." "Yeah, but what if Ella doesn't like living that way?" Tim's dad looked down at his watch. "Sit down, Tim." Tim sat on the arm of the sofa, and his father leaned towards him. "I'm sure it was hard for Ella after her mum died," he said. "She was sad, and she had a sad father who didn't want other people around. I don't think he's actually mean to her, though. I've heard him be a bit gruff sometimes, but never cruel. I wouldn't stand by quietly if I heard someone being unkind to a child." The laptop made a beeping sound, and Tim's dad closed the lid and turned back to Tim again. "I just don't think she's okay, Dad." It was hard for Tim to explain. He kind of ignores her. Tim's father tapped his fingers on the closed laptop. "What about Ella's stepmother? Serena, isn't it? The stepmother? She seems friendly." "Ella doesn't talk about her much." "I'd hoped that when Serena and her little girls joined the family, it might be a happier home for Ella." Tim stood up and walked over to the curtains, looking out across the road to Ella's house. The lights were on and the curtains were closed. From where he stood, it looked like any other house on Tui Street. Her dad might be happier with the stepmother and her daughters, Tim said, but Ella isn't. Tim's father joined him at the window looking over at Ella's house. Have you ever seen anyone do anything that's clearly nasty to Ella? No. Tim ran his fingers through his still damp hair. Then he remembered the rats. Well, not clearly nasty to Ella, but not very nice either. I suppose the best thing you can do is be kind to Ella and keep an eye out. If you see or hear anything that really worries you, then I need to know. Okay. Tim could feel his father's eyes on him as he let the curtain drop it back into place. If I find evidence, Dad, I'll tell you. He yawned. Anyway, I'm off to bed. See you in the morning. Tim's dad reached down and tousled Tim's hair. Night, son. The next day was a school day and Tim found Jack waiting for him on the front steps, fiddling with his shoelaces. Morning, Timbo, he said, standing and adjusting his backpack. Got something for you. Chocolate brownie. He handed Tim 3 still warm brownies wrapped in lunch paper. Shavings of chocolate and dustings of icing sugar were sprinkled on top of each brownie. Yes! Tim sniffed the brownie and sighed with pleasure. Got to tell you something, Jack, but we need evidence. Jack's eyes widened, but when he opened his mouth to speak, it was full of soggy brownie. Tim lowered his voice. It's Ella. Jack swallowed. You mean Ella in our street? He asked. Recycling Ella? Yeah, something's not right, even with the stepmother and her daughters living there. Jack chewed quietly as they began to walk. You know what this is, don't you? He whispered eventually. The fairy tale project. Jack, look at the facts, Tim. There's a stepmother, 2 stepsisters, and an Ella, like Cinder. It's not a fairy tale, Tim said quietly. He could feel a headache starting at the back of his eyes. Luckily, Terry jogged up to them with her soccer ball, and they began passing and dribbling as they walked. By the time they reached the school gate, thoughts of cruel stepmothers and mistreated stepdaughters had long gone, along with Tim's headache. Early that same morning, Serena had bought some small pizza buns from the local bakery. She'd hoped Ella might be excited at the thought of taking one for lunch. The buns just called to me through the bakery window, she said, laughing. And I know you like them, Ella. Ella was at the table eating toast and practicing her spelling words once again before the test at school. She looked up briefly before looking back at her notebook. We like pizza too, Rita said. Don't forget us. I wouldn't forget you, Serena said. She held up a pizza bun in each hand and made a point of showing her daughters, Rita and Angela, that she was placing them in their lunch boxes. I think I'd rather have my cheese and Marmite sandwiches, thanks, Ella said quietly, without looking up. She'd always made cheese and Marmite sandwiches with her mum. They'd played a game called lining up the cheese. They'd each take a piece of bread and see whose piece of cheese was cut the straightest, lining it up against the straight edges of the bread. Ella usually won. Looking back now, Ella wondered if her mother had let her win. Serena wasn't easily put off, though. She put the pizza bun in a small container. Okay, I'll leave your bun for you to eat when you get home from school. You might feel like it for afternoon tea. Thanks, Ella said politely. Getting to school had become a bit tricky for Ella. Before her mum had become sick, she used to walk to school with her. After she died, Ella had become used to her own company. However, since Rita and Angela had moved in, they insisted on walking to school with her and frequently told her how much they loved having such a big sister. Mostly, she wished they'd be quiet, although sometimes the things her stepsisters chatted about could be interesting, in a 5 and 6-year-old kind of way. That particular morning, Serena told them she was going to walk with them too. She wanted to have a quick chat with Ella's teacher, Mr. Tamati. She had an idea she wanted to discuss. "What's the idea? I can tell him," Ella said. "You don't need to come in." She wished Serena would stop trying to be involved in everything. She didn't need her help. Serena shook her head. "At the moment it's a secret, because it may not even happen. Even if Mr. Tamati likes the idea, I might keep it as a surprise. Surprises can be fun." Serena reached out and squeezed Ella's shoulder. Ella shrugged to show she didn't mind either way, but also to shake Serena's hand off her shoulder. When Serena arrived at Ella's classroom door, she scanned the room. Spotting Ella sitting on a cushion reading in a library corner, she gave her a little wave, as if casting a spell with a wand. Ella nodded at Serena and then looked back down at her book, hoping she'd realise she was busy reading. Fortunately, Serena walked straight to Mr. Tamati's desk and sat down beside him. Ella couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see Mr. Tamati doing a lot of nodding. Small pieces of the conversation drifted Ella's way. She heard Serena mention the word rubbish twice and recycling once. She also heard Mr. Tamati say, "I wanted to do a special kind of art project with them this term, and your idea will be perfect." Serena's response, though, was lost through the squeaking of a chair and someone dropping books on the floor. The conversation seemed to be ending. Serena stood, smiled and said a few more words. Mr. Tamati smiled back and said, "See you Monday at 11 then, straight after morning tea." As Serena made her way out of the room, she turned, did her wand-like wave at Ella and mouthed, "See you later." Then she was gone. Ella stared at the words on the page in front of her. What special art project had Serena been organising with Mr. Tamati? Why did she have to stick her nose in school stuff? Wasn't it enough that she'd brought 2 small girls and pizza buns into Ella's house? That night at the dinner table, Ella's dad pointed to a bump on his forehead. "I miscalculated the height of a doorway at work today," he explained. He was a tall man who often had to duck his head to get through doorways. "Your height was the first thing I noticed about you," Serena said. "You were so tall that it seemed as if your head could touch the stars while your feet stayed on the earth." Ella was struck by a memory. "Dad, remember when Mum was alive and you two were talking in the kitchen? I was in bed and I heard Mum say, 'I had to marry you, Bob, because your head's in the clouds and you need me to check your shoes are on the right feet before you go to work.' Do you remember Mum saying that, Dad?" Ella's father nodded. "Yes, I do." He looked down at his plate. When he looked up, he said, "So tell me, have you 3 girls had a good day at school?" Ella didn't care that he was trying to change the subject. She remembered it all very well. After her mother had said that, her dad's laugh had risen, air-filled and warm, like a hot air balloon, and floated through the house. Ella had smiled in bed, picturing his face, his crinkled eyes, his laughter as easy as his breath. She liked the way her mum joked with her dad about how dreamy he was. Her mother, on the other hand, was so organised. No one needed to worry when she was around. The fridge always had milk in it. The washing was hung out. The cheese always lined up with the bread. Quick water break. On the following Monday, Serena waved at Ella, Rita and Angela as they headed off to school. "See you at 11 o'clock, Ella," she said. "I'll be helping Mr. Tamati with the surprise." "It's not really a surprise," Ella retorted. "I already know it's an art project." Serena smiled. "Ah, yes, but what exactly is it?" She tapped her nose. "I knows." She turned away and walked back into the house. Ella didn't like surprises. Surprises could be nasty, like her mother getting sick. When her mum's legs started crumpling beneath her, the doctors said the x-rays showed a brain tumour. Within days, a van had delivered a wheelchair. Her mum hated the wheelchair, and often Ella snuck it out of her room while her mum snoozed. Her mother began to spend more and more time in bed. The minute Ella was home from school, she'd go straight to her parents' bedroom. "Jump up," her mum would say, patting the bed. "Tell me about your day. How did the spelling test go?" She always asked questions. Had the speech gone well? Had she eaten her lunch? Had Dad lined up the cheese as well as they did? Ella tried to think of funny things to say to keep her mother away from the sadness. Perhaps she might even get better if she laughed enough. Soon, Ella's mum almost completely stopped speaking. Ella would lie beside her and chat anyway. She'd explain how she'd forgotten to introduce the topic of her speech, or how she'd left her spelling notebook at home. It was getting harder to think of funny things to say. Sometimes Ella's mum reached over and patted her as if she were a cat. Often, though, her eyes stayed closed. With a deep, concentrated breath, her mum might ask Ella about Tim, Jack, or other children in the street, or ask whether the feijoas were growing on the trees outside yet. Her dad said her mum was going to die, but Ella felt, in a very small way, that she might not. Sometimes magical things could happen. Now she knew better. She also knew how she felt about surprises. During morning tea, Ella played on the obstacle course with her friend Lucy. She kept an eye out for Serena while Lucy chatted about a story she was writing. "It's about a princess visiting Tui Street," she explained, "for my fairy tale project." Ella nodded, but it was hard to focus. Serena arrived in the car, which was unusual because Serena liked to walk. Her car was a kind of round shape, like the belly of a plump man. Serena called the car Pumpkin because it was an orangey yellow colour too. The car was filled with boxes. Serena climbed out and piled some of the boxes on top of one another and began to carry them to Ella's classroom. Mr. Tamati came back out with her and collected more boxes. "What's in them?" Lucy asked. "Dunno," Ella replied. Lucy jumped down from the monkey bars, landing with a spongy thud on the safety matting beneath. "Let's help carry them, then we'll find out." "No." Ella was a little louder than she'd meant to be. "I don't want to help." "Okay, well, you stay here and I'll go. I want to know what's in those boxes." When the bell went, Ella met Lucy at the classroom door. "You'll never believe it," Lucy said. Her face was alive with the energy of a secret bursting to be told. "Your mother," "Stepmother," Ella interrupted. "Serena is my stepmother." "Yeah, that's right. Your stepmother, Serena, has got boxes filled with rubbish. Look." Lucy took Ella by the elbow and led her around the classroom. The tables had been pushed together and were covered in newspaper. On top of this lay mounds of recyclable household items: plastic yogurt containers, milk containers, long pieces of cardboard, jars, lids, trays, bottle tops, used envelopes, and much, much more. At first, Ella was simply struck by the amount of stuff that had come from the boxes. Then she noticed that the strawberry yogurt was the exact one they ate every morning. The yellow-lidded milk with the calcium sign on the front was the one her dad liked to drink. The ice cream that said no preservatives or artificial colours on its container was the brand Serena always bought. These recyclables were from her recycling bin. The strange thing was that each container was sparkling clean and had returned to its original shape, as if it had never been crushed by her and Tim. Ella looked over at Tim, sitting opposite her. Surely he would notice that this recycling came from her house. Tim, though, was more interested in the tower Jack was building beside him. Layer by layer, Jack placed recyclable products on top of one another. Tim had just passed Jack a plastic tomato paste container to balance on the jam jar when Mr. Tamati's hand landed on the jar first. "I think that's as tall as we'll make it, Jack," he said quietly. "There's Lego if you want to make towers later, but right now we're focusing on a different kind of creative project. Serena's about to explain it to you." Looking around the faces of the students in his class, Mr. Tamati continued, "Today, everyone, we will be working on something special. Serena will explain. You'll need to listen very carefully." Mr. Tamati looked at Serena and smiled. Ella breathed out slowly. Thank goodness Mr. Tamati hadn't mentioned that Serena was her stepmother. Serena stepped forward. Her long brown gold hair was swept back into a ponytail. Her blue eyes kept respectfully away from Ella. When she lifted her arm, a tinkling sound came from the bangles around her wrists. She spoke gently, as if the children were already her friends. Ella looked around the faces of her classmates. The whole class was giving her their full attention. Ella began to listen to what Serena was saying. "We're going to make something from all of these things that have been thrown away. The recyclable stuff is on the table in front of you," Serena said. Then she pointed to the back of the room. "And in the boxes over there, you'll find other things that are not recyclable. These things would have gone into a landfill, a massive rubbish pit in the ground. But you're going to create a piece of art from all of this instead. There's some very thick cardboard on Mr. Tamati's desk that you can use as well, and I'll bring more rubbish in tomorrow." Students began to move restlessly in their seats. Some even stood up, about to rush to the piles of thick cardboard at the front. Serena laughed. "Hang on, stay in your seats. I haven't quite finished yet. There are more exciting things you need to know. Mr. Tamati has the glue gun ready to go at his desk. You can only use that under our supervision. There are paints on either end of these tables." Serena stopped speaking and slowly looked around the faces of the children seated in front of her. Everyone had become surprisingly quiet. "This is the most exciting bit, everyone," she said. "When the art pieces are finished, we thought we might exhibit them in the school hall and invite parents to come and look at them." She smiled at the class. "Okay, you've been very patient. Now please make your way to Mr. Tamati. Don't all rush at once to collect the cardboard." While the class busied themselves up the front, Ella gazed at the rubbish, mesmerized by its gleam and sparkle. "This is all your rubbish," Tim said, sidling up to Ella. Ella nodded. "And it's so clean. Like it's been through some kind of car wash or something." Tim picked up a piece of flat, smooth aluminium foil. "And how does it go back into its normal shape?" Ella bent down over one of the boxes and pulled a silver cat meat pouch out of it, lifting it to her nose. She sniffed. Flipping it over, she sniffed it again. "It even smells really good, like lemon." Tim picked up a polystyrene meat tray and held it to his nose. "This smells like a rose. Honestly, smell that." He held it under Ella's nose. "How did she do that? How do you clean stuff like this so that it looks new and smells like perfume?" Ella lifted a puzzled eyebrow. Tim dropped the rose-fragranced meat tray back into the box. "Dunno. She must do it after we've sorted out the rubbish. It'd take ages to wash and dry it. She must stay up half the night." "Maybe. Well, how else would she change dirty rubbish into this?" Ella swept her arm over the boxes. "Dunno." Tim scanned the rubbish in front of him. "Dad says the way to find out the facts is to observe. Maybe we should observe her." Ella nodded. Okay. She said she'll bring more rubbish in tomorrow. So she'll clean the rubbish tonight, Tim said, after we've sorted through it, because it's collection day tomorrow. So we watch her tonight? Ella said. Yep. I want to know how she did this. Without thinking, the words that had troubled Tim came out. Is she ever mean to you? He asked. Serena? Ella asked, looking at Tim with her serious eyes. No, she's not mean to me. Tim looked away. His cheeks flushed. We'll need Jack's help too. He's good with facts. Need me for what? Jack appeared with a large square of cardboard. I'll tell you later, Tim said. We'd better go and get your cardboard. Ella headed to the front of the room, but Tim hung back and whispered quietly to Jack, You're right. There's something strange about Ella's stepmother. But not like we thought. Ella said she's not mean to her. She could be lying, Tim. Ella? Nah, she was telling the truth, Tim said. It's just Serena's... Tim stroked his neck. His throat was beginning to hurt. She's not like other mothers. Jack looked over at Serena, who was discussing art materials with a child. She seems nice. Yeah, Tim agreed. Uh-oh, Mr. Tamate's looking at me. I better get my cardboard. He moved away up the room, just as Mr. Tamate called out, Tim, it's time you got started. The moon was low. Its bony elbows of light nudged the green bins set out on the curbs like messy Lego pieces. Some were overflowing, heaped with the unwrappings, unstickings and peelings of everyone's lives. Crouched behind Tim's bins, the children could see Serena's comings and goings through the thin curtains of her house. Her shadowy shape moved around the girls' bedroom, bending, straightening, and gesticulating to her daughters in front of her. The children watched as she stroked the head of one of the little girls. A moment later, she leant down and disappeared from view under the window ledge. Damn, Jack muttered. We've lost her. She must be reading them a story, Ella explained. How long will that take? Tim asked, coughing. Not long. She reads to them every night. Ella hoped she was right. Sometimes Serena got so comfortable snuggling up with her daughters that she fell asleep. Tim coughed again. I'm not allowed to stay out too late because of my cold, he said. He could hear the frustration in his own voice. He'd waited for this moment all day, the moment the truth about Serena would unfold. He needed to see everything. Did she close the door behind her quietly so no one noticed her leaving? Did she inch her way to the end of the driveway in the shadows? Did she aim straight for the bins, or did she walk for a while first to avoid attention? He hated not knowing. It made his throat ache even more. Jack nudged Tim. Might be better if you go inside anyway. If you cough, she'll hear you and that'll ruin everything. I won't cough, promise, Tim said. Shh! Ella pointed at her house. Serena had opened the lounge window and was leaning out, looking around the front garden as if listening for something. She placed her thumb and finger in her mouth and made a gentle whistling sound. Everything was still. Again, Serena whistled, but this time with a bit more volume. From the shadows came soft footsteps, small thuds, scrapes and rustles of leaves as tiny figures stepped out from behind pot plants, a bucket, shrubs, bushes and rocks. One jumped out of the letterbox and another came from behind Ella's bike, propped up against the side of the house. It was hard to make out exactly what they looked like from behind the bins on the other side of the road, but the figures were definitely human, and Tim estimated about half the size of his cat. On their heads were floppy, cone-shaped hats. They wore raggedy coats with patches on them, and their legs disappeared into boots that curled up like an old man's moustache. Ella's eyebrows lifted. Gnomes? Dunno, Jack answered. Elves? What's the difference anyway? Ella shrugged. At Christmas it's elves. They wrap the presents at the North Pole. And then there's that old shoemaker in that fairy tale who has those elves that made shoes every night, Tim added. Hey, look! The small figures came to a stop under the window and looked up at Serena, who smiled at the gathering below her. Hello, friends, she said quietly. Thank you for coming to help me again. A gentle murmur could be heard until one small man with ginger curls spilling from his floppy green hat stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. We are honoured. This is indeed a special task. Serena's smile widened. Thank you, Albert. You're very kind. You could charm the birds out of the trees. The crowd of small people murmured, again nodding heads. You should talk to my wife, Serena, Albert said, hand on his chest. She thinks I'm charming too. He smiled, and the moon glinted on his teeth. Soft laughter rippled through the group. A small woman with a scarf wrapped around her head sidled up to Albert and poked him playfully on the arm. Do I now, Albert? You'd be a lot more charming if you stopped talking and let us get on with Serena's task. The tiny woman looked up at Serena, her green eyes twinkling with merriment. You go ahead now, Serena, and I'll keep him quiet. Thank you, Maggie, Serena said, smiling. Well, the job's the same as last week and the week before. And when all the useful rubbish and recycling are sparkling clean, just stick them in the boxes in the garage. She looked at her watch. I'll go in and check on the girls. Won't be long. Serena began to walk away from the window, then turned back briefly. Oh, and if you find any rats, just do the usual with them. I must talk to my husband about the way he throws them into the bin like that. It's really not fair on Ella. Light as ballet dancers and quick as Olympic sprinters, the smallest people Ella had ever seen leapt into action. Some high-jumped to the top of the bins, lifted the lids, and as if throwing frisbees, plucked out the rubbish and sent it soaring down to the others. The people below were ready for action. Out of their pockets they pulled small brushes, rags, polishers and detergents. They quickly assembled into small teams. The one at the front of each team caught the rubbish and passed it on to the next, who scrubbed it with detergent. The next one rinsed, and the next dried, the next polished, and the final one placed it carefully into a box from the garage. As each piece of rubbish made contact with a tiny hand, a brief, soft light glowed, and the rubbish returned, bit by bit, to its original shape. While the little people worked, they hummed or whistled. Some showed off, doing the odd cartwheel or juggling the rubbish that flew from the bins. Who could be that happy cleaning? Jack wondered aloud. Especially cleaning rubbish, Tim agreed. They're part of a team. They belong together, Alice said. And as she said it, she knew she'd said something from a part of her she couldn't explain. Her mum and dad had been a team with her. It was why she couldn't let Serena's smiles and pizza buns win her friendship. By the time Serena came back outside, just 10 minutes later, the boxes were full of gleaming, sterilised, perfectly shaped and sweet-smelling rubbish. Wow, she said. You guys are kind to me. Thank you. We separated the recyclables from the ordinary rubbish, just like last time, one of the younger little people explained. She was probably around Ella's age. On her head she wore a bandana and her coat sleeves were rolled up. Wonderful, Martha, Serena replied. I can't tell you how grateful I am. I knew you'd be able to help me, even if it is a crazy plan. And of course, it may not work. A little old person stepped up to Serena, who towered over him like a giant. He stroked his smoky grey beard as he spoke. How's that plan going? He asked. Any success yet? Not exactly, Serena answered. Ella's very clever though, and so talented at art. I tried to talk to her about her art, Archie, but she doesn't say much. Keep trying, Archie said. He reached up to pat Serena comfortingly. Her knee was as high as his arm could reach. Never give up on a child, he said. The group of small people murmured in agreement. Serena wiped her eye. Was she crying? Ella looked uncertainly at the boys. Tim was already looking at her. She's talking about you, he whispered. She thinks you're clever and talented. Ella nodded slowly. So, Jack added, she's not an evil stepmother. She's not wicked at all. He turned to Tim. Another fact, I guess. I'm confused. He turned to Ella. Are your two little stepsisters horrible to you? Ella shook her head. They're okay. They've gone, Tim whispered loudly. Look, the little people have gone. Across the road, Ella's front yard was empty again, except for Serena, who stood alone, arms folded, looking at the boxes. With a sigh, she began dragging them to her car, lifting them one by one into the boot. If Ella strained her ears, she could hear Serena humming the same tune the little people had hummed. The melody seemed to perk Serena up. Locking the car, she continued to hum as she made her way back to the house. When she reached the door, she turned and looked over at Tim's house, past the children hiding behind the bins. I wonder if I should pop over to collect Ella, Serena said aloud. Guess you'll be home soon. Must be nearly Tim's bedtime. Turning back, she opened the door and disappeared into the house. Jack stood up. Pins and needles in my feet, he said. Tim stretched and coughed. His front door opened and his dad stepped out onto the front porch. Tim, that cough's getting worse. Time for bed. Coming, Dad, Tim answered, but he didn't move. She said you're clever, Jack said. We got this so wrong. Who's wicked then? Ella answered, none of them. They all try to be kind to me. But maybe this is different to the fairy tale, Jack, Tim said. But if everyone's kind to you, Ella, Jack continued, why aren't you happy? Ella didn't answer. Tim's dad's voice cut through the silence. Tim, home, now. I'd better go, Tim said. Me too, Jack said. See you tomorrow, Ella said. She crossed the road, looking at her house. Somehow it looked lighter, as if the group of little people had carried something worrying away with them. The finished artworks were hanging on the walls of the school hall. Each piece had the signature of the artist at the bottom. Families wandered round the hall slowly and thoughtfully. All of the Tui Street kids were there. Jack, Tim, Terry, Lucy, Louie, the twins, Gemma and Harry, as well as Ella. Small children ran around, but even they slowed occasionally to peer at a particular piece of art. Ella had made her way around the whole exhibition twice. There were a few pieces she particularly liked. Louie, who was new to their street and their school, had made a tui using real feathers. Lucy's Tui Street Princess had tiny pictures of fruit cut from yogurt containers and glued onto her dress. Terry's soccer ball was her favourite though. Terry had flattened drink cans and arranged them into alternating squares of colour to make a soccer ball. Beside it was a soccer boot made out of used cardboard with real bootlaces threaded through it. Ella gazed at Terry's artwork while listening to Serena chatting with other parents. Ella's dad was with Serena. He'd just arrived from work. He stood, tall as the tree in Jack's front yard, nodding and occasionally contributing to the conversation in his deep, low voice. Funny how his spoken voice was so different from his laugh. When he laughed, the sound was lighter, as if floating towards the clouds, towards heaven. For a moment, Ella's stomach felt empty. Her mum wasn't here to see her own portrait. I love the soccer ball piece, Serena's voice interrupted Ella's thoughts. Her hand was on Ella's arm. Her bangles tingled and her perfume almost shimmered around Ella's face until she had no choice but to breathe the perfume in deeply. You smell nice, Ella said, surprised she hadn't noticed that before. Thanks. Serena's hand was still on Ella's arm, and for the first time ever, Ella didn't feel the urge to nudge it away. This is my favourite, Ella said. Is it? Very clever use of materials, and I like the colours she's used. Is it your favourite too? Ella asked, twisting a strand of her brown hair around her finger. Her hair never stayed in a ponytail properly. I like it a lot, but it's not my favourite, Serena said. Which one is then? Yours, Ella, Serena said, turning to look at Ella. I love the way you created an image of your mum with such care and attention. I think it's a beautiful portrait. Ella's hair was so tightly wound around her finger that it hurt. She unwound it slowly. Serena's hand was still on her arm. Ella looked at it. Serena followed Ella's eyes, gave her arm a little squeeze, then let it go. Shall we show your dad your portrait? Serena asked. He hasn't had a chance to see it yet. Ella nodded and followed Serena and her jingling bangles over to her father. Interrupting a discussion between Ella's dad and some other parents, Serena took him by the elbow. Excuse me, everyone, she said. I'm just going to steal Bob away for a minute to show him his daughter's artwork. Yes, of course. That's what we've come to see, Ella's father agreed. Turning away, he looked around him. Where is Ella? She's right here. Serena reached behind her and gently pulled Ella to her side. Ah, there you are. Ella's dad put his hand on his hip. Here, take my arm. It's only appropriate that the artist accompanies me. Lead the way. Ella hooked her arm through her dad's and took a few steps, then stopped. Dad, I think I should warn you that it's a portrait of Mum. I know, her dad said. Serena told me. She said it's very good. Come on, we'll have a look, shall we? In front of the portrait, Ella and her dad looked like any father and daughter at an exhibition. No one could have known how much every tiny component of the portrait before them mattered, how every little part of the face had an importance of its own. You've got the colour of her hair exactly right, Ella's dad remarked. I hope so. There were lots of bits of material in a box, and finally I thought that was the right colour, but then I couldn't remember if it was exactly right. Sometimes I forget things about how she looked, Dad. The colour is perfect, Ella. It must have taken you ages to cut it into those strips. It really looks like her hair. Ella could hear Jack somewhere down the other end of the hall. He was laughing loudly. She wondered what was so funny. Her dad turned to her. His eyes were watery. You've even got the little freckles on her cheeks. Serena helped me with that, Ella said. We picked up tiny bits of gravel on the concrete. Ella's father nodded slowly. I couldn't talk about her, Ella, he said quietly. It's still hard for me. I didn't know how to help you. I could see you were so sad, but Ella interrupted him. I was okay, Dad. Sorry, he said quietly, for how I was. His big warm hand wrapped around Ella's. She wasn't sure what to say to him, so she squeezed his hand back instead. Quick water break. Under the moon, Serena and Ella walked home from the exhibition. Ella's dad had driven the little girls home, but Serena and Ella had decided to walk. Behind them, Awatiru School was almost in complete darkness now, with just the faint glow of a few sensor lights. Ella's ponytail bobbed as she jumped slightly to avoid the cracks in the pavement. Step on a crack, marry a rat, she thought. Sometimes she still played that game with herself. Suddenly she stopped and turned to face Serena. I hate rats, Serena. I'm not that fond of them myself. Oh, and by the way, I've asked your dad to bury the water rats down the bottom of the garden in the future. I don't think he really thought about how unpleasant that would be for you when you sorted the recycling. Shouldn't be many rats now anyway, because the council sent pest control to get rid of them. Serena said, also we thought we'd try to put the recycling in a separate bin inside so that you don't have to sort it all on Monday nights. 2 bins inside, Ella said. That's a good idea. Ella walked beside Serena. The evening had become cooler, but the sky was clear and the moon, a golden smile-shaped crescent, lit up the path for them as they walked. I saw you, you know. Ella spoke, even as she wondered whether she should say anything. She reached nervously for a strand of hair. Saw me? With those tiny people. I saw you. Ah. Ella looked up at Serena. She hoped she wasn't annoyed. Serena's face was the colour of honey under the moonlight. She nodded gently. Does Dad know? Ella asked. He knows, Serena answered. Jack thinks you're my fairy godmother, Ella said. What do you think? You might be. Serena smiled. A car passed and tooted its horn. Jack leant out of the window, waving and yelling, Night, Ella! We're going to beat you guys home. As Ella waved at him, she noticed Serena doing her special wave, as if with a wand, and as if to make wishes come true. Do you want to race me, Ella? Serena asked. Race you to the corner of Tui Street. Last one there marries a rat. Ready, set, go. Ella was so used to not joining in that for a moment she stood and watched Serena sprint away from her. She was surprisingly fast. Then it occurred to Ella that she'd better get moving or Serena would win. Within seconds, she'd not only caught up with Serena, but was sprinting past her. Up ahead, the Tui Street sign glinted in the moonlight. They were nearly home. And that's the end of the story, Recycling Ella. I hope you enjoyed it. The next story will be recorded soon and be up on my website. Take care.